What's up, guys? Welcome back to another episode of Katson's Corner, the show where we talk about college football from a Chargers perspective. I'm your host, as always, Alex Katson. You can find me all over the place these days. Just going to Twitter and typing in the username that you see on the screen is going to be the best way to find me. But you guys can do that after the show. Because today we have a little bit of a deviation from the form. If you guys have been watching all season, we've been talking a lot about the visits that the Chargers have been going on, the games that they've been attending. A little bit of a lighter week this week. Didn't go to as many games, so I thought I would do something a little different this week. A lot of you guys have been either adding me on Twitter or adding me in the Patreon Discord or various other places that you can find me, and you've asked, Alex, are there any good center prospects in this year's draft? Is there any way that we can upgrade on center? Is there anything that we can do about center? Those requests have only increased in frequency since the week 3 game with Bradley Bozeman kind of rolling that snap back to Justin Herbert. Some kind of continued issues on the interior of that offensive line. So today we're going to talk about the centers. We're going to talk all about the centers. We have 7 guys, I think, if I remember how to count, that I've done a little primer on. We're going to talk about kind of what their evaluation was going into this season, how they've kind of played through the first little bit, and just talk about, like, do the Chargers have a potential future center sitting here in the 2025 draft? I will warn you guys that none of these guys are as good as the players that they could have drafted last year. Um, I like Zach Frazier better than all of these guys. I like Graham Barton better than all of these guys. I like Mason McCormick better than all of these guys. And Mason McCormick isn't even playing center in the NFL. He played guard for the Steelers in week 3. I like JPJ better than all of these guys. He's also playing guard for the Raiders. So it's a worse class on paper. But the good news for the Chargers and for us is that it's still very early in the season, and so there's still room for a guy like that to emerge, especially on the offensive line. Most of the prospects you don't start hearing about until much later in the year, when it gets to December, January, when the Senior Bowl and the Shrine Bowl start happening, then you start hearing about these guys that are interviewing well, because so much of the offensive line is going to be about how well you interview. If you guys remember from last year, one of the guys that was a star of this show was Hunter Norzad from Penn State. Went to the Shrine Bowl, interviewed fantastically. Was one of the guys that we were really pounding the table for here from the podcast, because he was just so sharp, so smart. Ended up going to the Chiefs. That's the way it goes sometimes. So a lot of these guys, you will probably not hear their names again until December, January, February, March, even, as we sort of talk about like what the Chargers are going to be doing once the draft actually hits. But we're going to do a quick primer on them this week, so that you guys have some familiarity. You guys know where to be looking. And yeah, if you appreciate that, before we get started, make sure you guys do all the YouTube stuff, subscribe to the channel, make sure you have the notification bell on so that when people are talking about the actual Chargers games that are happening, you get notified that they're going live and that their videos are up and all of that stuff with Steven and Tyler and Alex. Go find me on the internet. I have a very special announcement that I will probably be making right around when this video comes out. So, that's very exciting. It has to do with draft content. So if that's what you're here for, you will enjoy that one, I promise. But yeah, let's get into this. So first one we're going to talk about is Jonah Monheim, who we've talked about on the show a little bit already this year because the Chargers have gone to a USC game. You guys may also be familiar with Monheim, given that a lot of Chargers fans are also USC fans because of the geographical proximity. Monheim switched from left tackle to center this season. That was a mutual decision between him and the coaching staff. Lincoln Riley said it's the best long-term position for him, development-wise. Monheim said that he had been interested in playing on the interior for a little while. Center is the best position for him to do that. So here he is, starting at center after he started the entire season at left tackle, rather. Sorry, last season. He's played left tackle, he's played right tackle, he's played a little bit of right guard, he's played center now, so he's super versatile guy. Reminds me a little bit of I know you guys are going to be thinking Graham Barton immediately, right? But it reminds me a little bit more of John Gaines, who came out of UCLA 2 years ago, was a fifth round pick. He's on the Cardinals now. But he spent time at all five positions at UCLA. That's kind of more the wheelhouse that I see Monheim in, especially with that sort of draft capital. I don't think that Monheim is necessarily going to be someone that rises all the way up to the level of a first round pick like Barton did. Um, but I think probably somewhere in between where Barton went and where Gaines went in the fifth round is probably realistic for Monheim. I would say probably around 3 or 4 right now. Super active hands, super active feet. He's a very good mover. Hand strikes are precise. I like his technique. I like a lot of things about it. That quickness is only accentuated on the interior going against less explosive players, and so oftentimes that can be a big help when you move to the inside. Um, Obviously has a super high football IQ. I think that's very evident based on the way that he's been able to switch positions multiple times without missing too much of a beat. That means that he's going to be a really high floor player in the NFL. And I know what you're thinking. That's what we said about Zion Johnson, and he still can't pick up a stunt. Zion Johnson has been largely fine this season, I would say. I know that we would all like for him to play better, and that we would like for a former first round pick to be better than fine, but I think that Zion Johnson has largely been fine. Monheim is going to be sort of the same story. I think that he's, like I said, going to have a high floor as a prospect, maybe not the highest ceiling. I don't think he ever is necessarily going to develop into someone who's an all pro at center or anything like that. But I do think that you're going to be getting a serviceable player, someone who's going to be a solid starter for multiple years. Does need to continue adding some bulk. He played last year at tackle at I think 310 it was, maybe even lighter than that. Gonna have to add a little bit more weight to hang on the interior in the NFL. You saw that against Michigan. When USC played Michigan last week, Mason Graham did kind of have him in the blender a little bit, toss him around on a couple reps. Now, of course, that's Mason Graham, who's projected to be a top 10 pick this season. But also, that's who's in the NFL. If you think about like the teams that the Chargers have already played, you've already played against Christian Wilkins. You've already played against why am I blanking on his name? Cam Hayward. You have to play against Chris Jones twice a year. You might have to play against Dexter Lawrence. You missed out on playing against Derek Brown because he got injured, but you would have had to play against Derek Brown. Like those guys are in the NFL. Mason Graham is going to be a very good NFL player, and so Monheim struggling against him doesn't necessarily mean that he's a complete nothing as a prospect, but it is something to just kind of monitor for the rest of the season. I would like to see him maybe perform a little bit better against NFL level competition as the season goes on. Luckily, USC will have plenty of opportunities to do that because they're in the Big Ten now. There's plenty of guys that he'll go up against where he will get plenty of those tests. Moving on to Parker Brailsford. He is the center over at Alabama. Spent the last 2 years actually at Washington with Kalen DeBoer. Moved over to Alabama when DeBoer got that job this offseason. He's only a redshirt sophomore, so there is a little bit of question about whether or not he's going to come out this year. Played really well as a redshirt freshman last season for the Huskies. Started all 15 games for them. Started 2 of those games at right guard actually before moving to center for the other 13. Excuse me. The thing with him is that he is small. And when I say small, I mean he's tiny. He's 6'2", which is 14th percentile, and 275 pounds, which is 0th percentile. What that means, if you don't know, is that he would be the lightest center in the NFL. He would also be one of the shortest centers in the NFL. He's a very small man, but it doesn't matter because the thing that's so great about Brailsford is that he plays with such natural leverage. And he's so quick and he's so explosive because he is a little bit smaller that he has to make up for that in other ways. And so he's so explosive off the snap. You see him snap the ball and within like one step, his hands are already up and they're in the pads and they're right where they need to be. It's super precise every time. And then, he's taking these guys 320 pound defensive tackles and driving them off the ball. And that's purely a leverage thing. Like he's a very strong player. Don't get me wrong. Like obviously you have to have a lot of functional strength to play on the offensive line, kind of regardless of how big you are. But there's so much leverage at work there that he makes use of really well. That I really think is going to translate well to the NFL, even if he is a little bit smaller. Um, I think that the concern here would probably be that he's maybe not necessarily the greatest fit for the Chargers. Um, Probably gonna be more of a zone scheme, a spread, offense type blocker. If you think about, like, Aaron Brewer, is the center for the Dolphins now. He came out at 274 pounds, and was a UDFA, ended up signing with the Titans, played a couple years there before he moved to the Dolphins. I think he's still only barely over 300 pounds now. He's really small for a center. Um, but the Dolphins like that. That's what the Dolphins are looking for because the Dolphins offense is predicated on horizontal motion. There's a lot of horizontalism going on in that offense. A lot of screens to Tyreek Hill and Jalen Waddle, a lot of outside runs to Devin Achane and Raheem Mostert. Lots of sort of, things that are not moving just up and down the vertical plane of the field. The Chargers, as we've seen so far this season, are much more reliant on running the ball up the middle. They're much more reliant on sort of gap runs, maybe some inside zone mixed in there. That is the stuff that I think that Brailsford is going to struggle with, because he's just not big enough to do it. And you've seen Brewer, who I think is sort of the only comparison that you can really make to Brailsford as an active player. Um, you've seen Brewer struggle with that before when he was in Tennessee and he was the center there. Had some really bad reps of trying to run, power football with Derrick Henry back there because he's just not big enough to do that. And so I'm a little bit worried about that in terms of a fit with the Chargers. Now, again, Brewer did play 3 or 4 seasons with Tennessee before he went to Miami and hung around and was the starter for most of that time. And so it's still possible to put someone like that in that position. But I do think that, like, either he's gonna need Brailsford, I mean, is gonna need to get bigger, and get closer up to that, like, 300-pound threshold, and maybe that takes an extra year and he doesn't come out until 2026, or he may end up being someone that plays for a different team, and Chargers fans are gonna be upset about that the same way that they were upset about the fact that Zach Frazier went to the Steelers and JPJ went to the Raiders and Hunter Norzad went to the Chiefs, but there's going to be a very defined reason for that, unlike maybe those other 3 guys. Moving on here to Jared Wilson out of Georgia. Chargers have gone to a Georgia game this season. This guy is a freak. I don't really understand how he is doing all of this. So Jared Wilson, who is the center for Georgia, he actually plays center, which is a key distinction because we'll get into some guys in a second here who are not currently playing center. But he's the center. He took over for Cedric Van Pran this season, who went to the Bills last year. I know he was a guy that was on a lot of people's radars for the Chargers last season as well. Wilson is the one that's taken over. Again, only a redshirt sophomore, may not come out this year. Pretty limited experience. He's only played 358 snaps as of this week. So he'll probably be close to 1,000 or so career snaps by the time the season ends. Um, but he's also run a 10.91 in the 100 meters. He also used to play linebacker. He led his high school with 117 tackles as a senior. You're not supposed to be able to do that if you're an offensive lineman. You're supposed to be playing D tackle if you play both ways. He's playing linebacker. He's making 117 tackles. That's an insane statistic. I don't know that I'm ever going to get over that as long as I live. So obviously, Wilson's calling card here is explosiveness. He's super explosive off the ball because he has all of that natural athleticism from playing linebacker and and these track accolades, and like all of that is proof of the fact that like he is a very athletic player. He's gotten off to a really strong start to the season. He's got 2 guys next to him, Tate Ratledge and Fairchild. I can't remember his first name right now. I think it might be Dylan Fairchild. Um, those 2 guys are both going to be NFL players as well, in my opinion. I think that some of the things of Wilson's inexperience and things like that have been sort of masked by that. You add in the fact that like Georgia hasn't really played a tough game quite yet. They played Kentucky pretty close last week. Dion Walker for Kentucky is a really good defensive tackle prospect, but they haven't really played like a full front that I'm really worried about. They will this week when they play Alabama, and so we'll see how that goes for Wilson. That's kind of like his first key test of the year, probably his biggest test of the year until at least until Georgia gets to the playoff potentially. But what I really want to see from him throughout the rest of the season is timing. I think he's still developing sort of the timing of playing center. He's still sort of developing the timing of playing offensive line in general. Picking up stunts and seeing blitzes and getting his hands in the right place at the right time, and really engaging with blockers correctly. Like I think all of that is still sort of a work in progress. It's something where He's clearly athletic enough to do it, and that's why he's on this list. He's gonna be a late day 2, maybe early day 3 pick just off the athleticism, regardless of, like, how much he knows how to play center or not, because at the end of the day, if you're athletic to play center at Georgia, you're probably athletic enough to play center in the NFL. It's just a matter of cleaning up that technique, because you're not gonna be playing Kentucky and McNeese State and whoever else, Kent State, and, these teams that Georgia's played early in the season. Um, you're playing against an NFL squad every week. And so there's going to be some technique stuff with him. I want to see him clean that up a little bit. This week is a really big opportunity to do that against a really good Alabama front. Alabama always has a really good front. So I'm hoping that he can do that. But I think that right now, he's someone that I'm sort of interested in, like round 4, round 5 ish, kind of like that early day 3 territory, right around where Van Pran went, actually. Moving on to Cooper Mays out of Tennessee. He's another one that we've talked about on the show before because the Chargers have been to a Volunteers game. Um, he's got NFL bloodlines. His brother is a guard. I believe it's for the Giants now. He got drafted by the Panthers originally. Played with his name is Cade Mays. He played with Cooper for a couple years at Tennessee as the guard while Cooper was playing center. Um, Tennessee's offense is very up tempo, which requires Mays to kind of make a lot of calls and do a lot of setting up on the fly. There's not really a lot of huddling necessarily in Tennessee's offense. There's a lot of just like let's get up on the ball and outrun these guys. So he's got to be a pretty decent athlete, got to be a very smart player in order to be able to kind of set up those no huddle looks and say like, okay, like, if the defense is changing the coverage in between play 1 and play 2, but there's no huddle in between, and so we're not really getting a good look at the formation that they're coming out in, then Mays has to be the one to point all of that out and say like, okay, this is what's coming at us on this play, especially with a redshirt freshman quarterback, Nico Yamaleva, who's really not making a lot of those calls right now because he's just not experienced enough to. Mays is going to be a center only in the league. The last time he played guard was in high school. He's only played center since he got to Tennessee. That's not necessarily a bad thing. But when you get into players that you're talking about as day 3 players, which I think is where Mays is going to end up for me as well, that lack of versatility can sometimes drive you down the board a little bit. We saw that happen with Norzad, who lasted until the 5th, 6th round. We've seen it happen with Van Pran a little bit. I think a few more people thought Van Pran would be able to play guard than Norzad, but he definitely got drafted as if he was going to only play center. A lot of those guys get driven down the board. It's just not as much of a premium position in the NFL. And so if that's the only thing that you can do, you get driven down the board a little bit because ultimately, like if you're going to be drafted in the 5th or 6th round, you're going to be the depth center. You're not being drafted to be the starter right away necessarily. And so if you can only provide depth at center, that means they have to keep an extra body that can provide depth at guard. I think that's why you see the Chargers still rostering someone like Brendan Jaimes, who has versatility to play both. Maybe not at a super high level at either one, but he can do both. And so he saves you a body on the offensive line by virtue of the fact that he can fill in at guard or at center, depending on what the need dictates. Mays has not given up a sack since 2022. It was week 9 of 2022. It was against Kentucky. He has not given up a sack since then. It's been almost 2 full seasons at this point since he's given up a sack, almost 2 full calendar years. So that's pretty good. There is also a caveat there of Tennessee tends to get the ball out pretty quickly. Their quarterbacks tend to be pretty mobile. There's not necessarily a lot of interior pressure coming against them. There's not a lot of blitzing that you're doing against Tennessee because of those tendencies. And so there's maybe fewer opportunities for a center to pick up a sack allowed. All of those things aside, not giving up a sack since 2022 in 2 full calendar years, that's impressive, no matter how you slice it. The problem I think we're going to run into with Mays is that he's not a super great run blocker. Tennessee is not really a run heavy offense. Even when they had Jalen Wright last season, they were not a super run heavy offense. Again, sort of in the same mold as the Dolphins, which is where Jalen Wright ended up going. A lot of sort of spread you out runs, a lot of horizontal movement, not a lot of like, we're going to run gap straight up the middle against you. And so Mays doesn't necessarily have a ton of tape of doing that. And so again, from a Chargers perspective, like we talked about with Brailsford, is he going to be someone that can run those plays that we know Greg Roman has in the offense? I'm not really sure yet, and I don't know that we're going to get those answers until January when he hits the All-Star circuit and he plays in a different scheme than Tennessee's does. Because until then, he's going to just keep doing the things that he's doing at Tennessee because they're working. And why wouldn't you? Moving on to Texas, Jake Majors has played almost 3,000 snaps at center for the Longhorns. He has only played center since he got there. He's in his fifth year there. He's been the starter for 4.5 of those years. By the time his career ends, he will hit almost 4,000 snaps at center. Just going off the fact that like it will roughly be 800 this season. Call it maybe a little bit more if Texas makes the playoff and goes on a run. So it'll be somewhere in the high 3,000, low 4,000 number. That's a lot of snaps. That's important for someone that you're drafting to be a center. Those reps are crucial. Um, I know a lot of people have asked, like, oh, well, Zion Johnson has played center before, right? Like, they moved him to center during the Senior Bowl. So, like, why can't we move him to center? Why can't that be the solution? And the answer is it could. It very well could be the solution. But the problem that you're going to run into with that is that centers get better with every snap. There is so much uh, mental um, preparation that goes into center that you don't have when you play into guard. There's so many other things going on. You're making protection calls. You're, you're there are more combo blocks to work with. There's just more going on all sort of in general. You have to make the calls for the entire offensive line in most cases, unless your quarterback is doing that. A lot of offenses don't like for the quarterback to be making those calls, and so the center is making them. That's all on you. And then on top of that, you have to be able to snap the ball and then immediately get your hand back up and block the guy in front of you. And oftentimes that guy in front of you is Christian Wilkins, Dexter Lawrence, Derek Brown, Chris Jones. Like it's a premier defensive tackle, especially in the Chargers division and especially in the Chargers conference. Um, and so it's really hard. It's a really hard position to learn, and it's a really hard position to adjust to, especially in the middle of the season, and especially if you have not played it before. That's what makes Major so appealing, though, is that he's played almost 4,000 snaps by the time he comes out this year at center for a very high level team that's gone on playoff runs already. Made the playoff last year, fell in the semifinal. Will probably go on a run this year with the way that things are looking. Like he is going to have those battle tests already out of the way by the time he gets to the NFL, and he's scheme versatile. Texas is pretty. Excuse me. Texas is pretty. Multiple in their run game. They've run both gap and zone pretty equally. Majors was the center when Bijan Robinson was there, when Roshan Johnson was there. Roshan Johnson, a lot more of just a power between the tackles back. Bijan Robinson can kind of do everything because he's awesome. Keelan Robinson was at Texas when Majors was the center there. He's a lot more of just an inside between the tackles guy, can maybe break it outside every now and then with that kick return upside that he brought to the NFL with the Jaguars. The one thing with Majors is he's a little bit top heavy. And what I mean by that is that there's not a lot of weight in his lower half. I think that he's very upper body strong and he wins a lot of battles in the trenches with that upper body strength. But there's not necessarily as much anchor power in his legs. In the NFL, that's not going to work. So I would like to see him maybe add a little bit more bulk. He's only 310, so he has some room to add some weight there. I think without sacrificing too much athleticism, would like to see him kind of add a little bit there. That's probably going to be something that comes once he gets in the NFL. Like I said, he's played 43 straight games, started all 43 of them for Texas. He's only allowed 42 pressures in that time. So another great pass blocker. Is that, that's about one a game, you would say. I would say that that's pretty good. One pressure a game is manageable. You can get out of one pressure a game because it doesn't always mean that the quarterback is getting hit that one time. It doesn't always mean that the quarterback is getting sacked that one time. It just means that there's a guy that got past him once a game out of 70 plays. Is a little bit susceptible to swim moves. I think you saw that in Texas's game against Michigan this season. Again, Mason Graham, Kenneth Grant, those guys are going to be first round players. They're going to be really quality NFL players, but that's the level of competition you're going to be going up against every week when you get to the NFL. And so, having a counter for that, I think, is going to be something that I really want to see Majors work on for the rest of the season as well. Again, I think that he's a day three guy for me. Maybe pushes in around three. I would say probably round three, round four here. Moving on to Joshua Gray at Oregon State. We've talked about him briefly. Chargers went to an Oregon State game earlier this season. He is in his seventh year, technically, of college. He did gray shirt in 2018, which basically means that you were on scholarship, but you were not part of the team, if I'm remembering that correctly. And it doesn't count against your year of eligibility. So that's why he's allowed to have a seventh year. In 2018, he wasn't on the team. And so his eligibility clock doesn't start until 2019. Now he's in his sixth year at Oregon State, yada, yada, yada. So he's old, is the point. He's played left tackle and left guard at Oregon State. He has not played center before. He is currently playing left guard for Oregon State after playing left tackle for the last couple of seasons. But I think that a player that seasoned, a player that experienced, someone with the play recognition that he has and the athleticism that he has is a candidate to potentially move to center the same way that we saw Zion did during the All-Star circuit the year that he was drafted by the Chargers. Um, there is some bulk that will need to be added to Gray's frame. He sort of looks a little bit more like a tight end out there right now than an offensive lineman would in the NFL. So you need to add some weight to him there. The question is going to be how much does that weight of which he needs probably more than some of the other guys on this list. How much of that is going to take away from his athleticism that he has, which is already like good but not great, right? In the second level, he gets a little bit lungy. He gets a little bit out over his feet, over his frame, so it's a little bit sort of iffier than I would like it to be. Especially again with a lot of those sort of climbing blocks built into Roman's offense. Not necessarily the greatest thing. But as someone like down the board, day three territory, I think he's someone worth keeping an eye on. Oregon State is going to continue to run the ball a lot. That's sort of what their identity has been built around the last few seasons. So that mentality certainly fits. It's just whether or not the skill set does or not. And then finally, we have Zack Carpenter, who's at Miami this season. You'll notice that this is not a picture of him in a Miami uniform because he just got to Miami this year. Spent the last three seasons at Indiana, where he's played left guard, right guard, and center, primarily center. But the reason that I think that he's interesting is that A, nobody is talking about him yet, even though he's played very well for for the Hurricanes this season. And B, he was recruited by Jim Harbaugh at Michigan. He spent 2 seasons at Michigan before transferring to Indiana after the 2020 season. He played with Michigan in 2019 and 2020. So this is someone that the staff already knows. Jim Harbaugh already knows this guy. The offensive staff, is not as Michigan affiliated as the defensive staff is, but this is someone that's familiar to them. He has committed 8 penalties in his career, which is more than you want. It's roughly 2 a season. He didn't play in 2019, so he's really only played 4 seasons, 4 plus seasons at this point. So it's, 2 a season, which is not terrible, but it's also not great, especially from your center. He's more prototypically sized for center. He's about 320. I think he's 6'5", so a lot closer to kind of like the average body type of an NFL center. But again, there's going to be some questions about his run blocking. It's kind of been his worst trait. Basically, every stop he's gone so far. Miami's gotten to a little bit of a slow start on the ground, even with Damian Martinez back there at running back. So that's the thing that I'm going to be watching with him at Miami. He's pass blocked very, very well for this season, especially with a mobile guy like Cam Ward who likes to extend plays sort of in the pocket and really makes you work for it. He's done really well with all of that. But Miami's run game is still taking a couple weeks to get going. I would like to see that kind of take off a little bit, maybe run behind him a little bit. But at the end of the day, I mean, he's an all Big Ten honorable mention last season at Indiana, came to Miami to, be a part of this team that the Hurricanes built for this season with Ward and Martinez and him and a bunch of other transfers that came in to try to make a playoff run. He's someone that I think could be one of those guys that starts to sort of pop up on the radar as the season continues. And as we get into sort of all-star games and all that sort of stuff, you guys know how it goes. That's going to do it for today, guys. Hope you guys enjoyed sort of this different format. I know a lot of you have been asking about center, especially to me on Twitter and various other places. So hopefully that was helpful. That was informative. You guys have some people to watch, some teams to watch for. We'll kind of do more of these sort of positional previews as like more needs sort of materialize. If you guys like this format, please let me know. I will be in the comments of the video as normal, just kind of going back and forth with you guys about what do what you think the Chargers should do once it hits April and it's draft time. But again, thank you guys so much for watching. This is the reason that I get to do what I do. I appreciate you guys a lot. Go over to Twitter and find me places. I'm writing about all kinds of stuff. I'm writing about the Chargers. I'm writing about the Washington Huskies. I'm writing about the draft. I'm writing about all kinds of things. I'm doing this. I'm all over the place. I'm writing on SB Nation about kicking. You can find all sorts of things over there. I promise you that there will be at least one thing that you like. And if there isn't, then come let me know and I'll make something that you'll like. But we will have to wait until next week for that. And until then, I hope you guys have a wonderful rest of your week. Let's survive against the Chiefs. Maybe let's have no more players get injured. Please and thank you. And I will see you after that game. Bolt up, guys.